Hello friends, welcome back to this free Figma course for complete beginners. My name is Ines, I'm a principal product designer and hiring manager with 15 years of experience. If you've missed the previous lessons of this course, go to my YouTube channel and watch them. And this lesson will be dedicated to variables, a very important topic. And I must say, variables is my second favorite feature of Figma. They are only the second because, frankly speaking, you don't really work with them that often. Usually the idea of variables that you set them once and then you don't do any changes to it. Because this is the basis of your file, this is the basis of all of your styles, but understanding them in depth and setting them in the correct way is really important to make your work in Figma scalable. So let's dive deeper in them. Again, we have a file that has nothing created in it. And in the right-hand side panel, we see the local variables and local styles panel. In the previous lesson, we talked about the styles, and it is very important you watch this lesson because styles and variables, they have a lot of similarities, and the idea behind them is similar as well. The same as with the styles and components, you can save certain attributes in one place and then assign it to different objects, but in case you need to make a change in this initial attribute, you can only do this once in one centralized place. This is the groundbreaking idea of Figma. This is the game changer that Figma has introduced to us, and we love this tool so much for this reason. And variables is a relatively new function in Figma as well. Previously, we only had styles in Figma, and styles are very handy. They speed up our work in Figma, but it's not how the code works. So before the introduction of variables in Figma, I actually had to manually transfer my styles into the language that our developers will understand, the language that is used in CSS. There was a lot of work, a lot of misalignments, and right now, because we have variables, our designs are getting closer to the way how the code works. But no worries, you don't really need to understand how code works in order to understand variables. But if you really want to master variables on a high level, some knowledge of the basic definitions of code like CSS would be required. But in this lesson, because this is the course for complete beginners, we're not going to dive deeper in this code and syntax just yet. Let's first see what attributes can we save as a variable. Again, I have nothing selected on my page, that's why I'm able to see the two panels, the local variables and the local styles. In the previous lesson, we have reviewed how we can save the text style, color, effect, and the grid as a style. Now, if we look at the variables and what we can create there, you will also see some similarities. First of all, we can also save a color as a variable. And that's why Figma now prompts you to save colors as variables, not as styles. So let's discuss in which situation you would need to save a color as a variable and in which it is better to be saved as a style. Variables, by the definition, are meant to simplify the work with developers, because the way how we define variables in Figma now, it's very much close to how code works. But you might be working on a project that will never require some attention from developers. If this is just a portfolio project, or if this is a dribble shot, for example, or even a picture for social media, then in my opinion, for these use cases, there is no real need to work with variables. You can just save your colors as styles. The reason for that is that variables are quite complex. And you might not need this complexity when the project is small or when it is not used by anyone else. For myself, I have a rule of thumb. Everything that I create at work, I use variables. And for projects that I have only for my use, I use the styles. Now let's create a color variable and let's see what happens. In this pop-up, we have our color created. Let's give it a name. Let's call it white. And this is where we can define the value. There are more settings for variables than you would have for the styles. The same as with the styles, you can define the description, but also you will have the modes here. This idea of the modes is unique for variables, but it is a bit more advanced, and we're going to cover the modes in the next lesson. Then, what I find really interesting is that you can define the scope for this variable. What it means is that if I have a white color, I might want to limit people from using it everywhere they want. Sometimes for design systems, it's handy to be strict on the usage of the attributes. For example, for this white color, I might say you are not allowed to use it for the text and for the frame. Then it means that you can only use it for a shape. which is not a typical use case. I would say it's more handy when you limit it for usage as a stroke, for example, because I am not envisioning a wide stroke for any of the objects in my design library. So others will not be allowed to use it as well. Now, if we want to apply variable to an object, we do this in the same way how we would apply a style. We click here on this fill panel, and then we choose from the libraries that are available. Here I have my white color. And because we have limited it from being used as a stroke, you can see that I will not have it here as an option. This is what I find really useful, and I actually like limiting colors by usage because that prevents people from being creative where I don't expect them to be so. Now, what other variables can you create? Let's get back and choose the number. A number is a very interesting variable to have. Let me show you how it works. You have probably heard that in UI design, we like a grid system that is a multiple of 8. What I mean by that is that we like that every padding, every space in the interface, every rounding is a multiple of 8. It's either 8 or 16 or 32 and so on. So if you will define those numbers, those grid steps, as a variable, you would not need to redefine them every time, and it will also prevent others from occasional mistakes. So what I usually do is that I save these grid steps as variables. Let's also have a look, what do we have in the settings? Again, with the settings, we can limit certain numbers from being used in the places where we don't want them to be. For example, we might know that we don't want anyone to create a corner radius that is equal to 8. It is just too small, we don't want that. So we can switch it off, and then it will never be seen. Then if I will be creating an object for which I will be defining the corner radius, I can now use variables. I don't really need to manually type here the number, because there I might be wrong and I might occasionally type in the wrong number. As for example, here we don't have the 8 as an allowed corner radius in our design system. And now you can see that we're only allowed to use the corner radius that is equal 16. And instead of having an input field here, we see that it is applied as a variable. I appreciate Figma having this option because, as I said, this is what I use all the time. But I would appreciate Figma having presets for the numbers, because every time I had to manually create the variables that will be 8, 16, 32. And I do this for every file that I have. And as far as I know, this is the best practice in the industry. So Figma might as well create those presets and save us more time. But maybe those features, they are coming. Now let's go and create the variable that is called the string. And the string is actually, it's just the other name for the text. What I mean is that we might have an e-commerce store, and there is an often case that we will have a button that has add to cart. So instead of typing this text on every button all the time, I can just save it as a variable. And now, if I will create a text here somewhere, placing anything in it, and then if I decide to apply there a variable, I can do that from the right hand side panel here, and I can turn it into our CTA text without typing anything else. This is how easy it could be done. And what is again very, very awesome is that I can then change this text in here, and it will be changed everywhere in the documents where I used this copy, which again saves us loads of the time. Let's go next, and the last variable that we can create is called Boolean. This is the variable that is mostly used for prototyping, and it is actually the variable that also causes the most confusion. So I would say it's more on an advanced side of things. Because for this reason, and because we did not touch even a simple prototyping in this course yet, we are going to skip it for now. But once we are done with our prototyping, we are going to review the use cases for this particular variable. But also don't worry, so far I have used this variable myself only once, and also for a very narrow use case. I don't think many people would encounter that. So what you have just learned about variables is enough for 99% of your work in Figma. But before we finish the lesson, let's review the navigation in this window. Working with variables can quickly become really messy and really complex. That's why it's really important to review how you can navigate this. First of all, it's handy to know that you can create collections for your variables. You might be careful about creating collections because you cannot easily transfer variables from one collection to another. I have a little critique to Figma for not allowing us to do that easily, because what if I changed my mind and now my project is getting bigger and bigger and I might need a new collection? Unfortunately, I cannot transfer my variables to unclutter the major collection, so you have to think upfront how you will be using collections. My best use case is that I usually have one collection with basic styles, and then I have collections with the styles that are predefined through these basic styles. This is the concept of tokens in Figma, and we are going to have a lesson on this later on, and I will show you exactly how I work with the collections and how I define the tokens and variables. So don't worry, it's just for you to know that this is the use case that I often explore. The other use case that I have personally explored is the localization. Now, if I have a localization in my file, I will create a separate collection with the string variables that are defined for this particular language. But don't really worry about that for now. I'd say it comes with the experience and with learning the best practices and with working on the projects of different sizes. Now, you can also create the groups inside of a collection, and this is what I use quite often. You can create a group by right-clicking on a variable. It's not really explicit, but it's handy to know that it's there. And now you can create a group with your colors, for example. Then you will have all your variables here and then the colors that are grouped here, and I can give it a name. This will be like that. So this is something what you would definitely be using, and usually I create the groups for colors, I create the groups for grid numbers, and so on. We have one other thing in this window that we did not explore, but we are going to explore it in one of the next lessons. This is the modes. Mode number 1, mode number 2, or usually it is created for the light mode and the dark mode. This is a fantastic feature of Figma that I personally really love, because it feels like a magic if you did it right. And we are going to explore it in one of the next lessons, because it is a thing that is more of an advanced side. And that was it for today. I hope now you know how to work with variables in Figma, where do they are located and what are they used for. If you like this lesson and you plan to continue learning Figma, hit the subscribe button down below and click the bell. This way you will get a notification when a new lesson comes out. And I see you next time.